Hello, welcome to the Marshall and Frederick Sculpture Museum at Saginaw Valley State University. We're delighted you're here today. Today we're going to not only see the Marshall Frederick Sculpture Museum, we're also going to see a wonderful exhibition titled Pewabic Pottery, Patronage, Private Residences, Public Buildings, Sacred Spaces. We're also going to meet and talk to Dr. Thomas Brunk, the guest curator of this very special exhibition. Good afternoon, Dr. Brunk.
Hi, Marilyn. How are you?
Very good. Let me introduce to you the curator of this very, very wonderful exhibition of Pewabic pottery, historic Pewabic pottery, I might add. Dr. Thomas Brunk is a gentleman I've known for about 30 years. I met Dr. Brunk when I was working at the Archives of American Art, Smithsonian Institution, and had the honor and the privilege to process and catalog the papers of the Pewabic pottery in Detroit. It was at that time I met Dr. Brunk, and we have been friends all these many years. And so, Dr. Brunk, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Marshall Frederick Sculpture Museum, and I hope now that you will share with the audience all of your knowledge about Pewabic pottery.
Thank you, Marilyn. Welcome to the exhibit of Pewabic pottery here at the Marshall M. Frederick Sculpture Museum. Pewabic pottery was an international manifestation of the arts and crafts movement in Detroit, Michigan, and is the result of a collaboration of two talented individuals, Mary Chase Perry, later Mrs. Stratton, and Horace James Calkins. Horace Calkins was born in 1850 in Oshawa, then part of the British Empire, and started out in the dry goods business, coming to Detroit in 1870. He became involved with the dental supply business, and through that, in the interest of making kilns for dentists to fire porcelain teeth and inlays. That expanded into a business that also included furnaces and kilns for china decorators to do work in overglaze china decoration. Mary Chase Perry was born in 1867 in Hancock, Michigan, and later came to Detroit in 1882, and then studied at the Art Academy of Cincinnati and the Detroit Museum of Art School, primarily sculpture and painting, and supported herself by executing china decoration and teaching. She became involved in the marketing of Calkins kilns, called the Revelation kilns, and these are some examples signed by Miss Perry in the exhibition today. As these kilns developed, studio potters wanted to do more. They wanted to be able to fire underglaze, but the technology was not available to them until 1903, when Calkins developed and Miss Perry perfected a pottery kiln for the china decorators to make this transition to studio potters. So in this case here, we demonstrate the china decoration, the colors that they used, and then three examples of Miss Perry's work in underglaze decoration with the Revelation Pottery Detroit mark. This is the beginning of this collaboration and the beginning of the Pewabic pottery in 1901. By 1903, Miss Perry was ready to go public and start selling her wares in a national market, and Burley & Company in Chicago purchased a number of these pieces, and her sales began. We have some examples of these matte glazes, flowing matte glazes, in lamp bodies and leaded shades that they designed and made at the pottery. The glass for these shades coming from Kokomo, Indiana, Kokomo Opalescent Glass Works, which is still in business today. From there, she went on to develop other forms, particularly influenced by Asian and Oriental cultures, and as well the Persian cultures. She met and became friends with the international art collector Charles Lang Freer, who donated his collection to the Smithsonian Institution. The museum now sits on the mall, the Freer Gallery of Art. In this section, we focus on patronage, and primarily the patronage of Charles Lang Freer and his influence on Pewabic pottery. It was a unique collaboration because Freer had access to learning about the potter's art and the chemistry and glaze chemistry that goes into this. And Mary Chase Perry and Horace Calkins had access to Freer's collection of ceramics. Freer acquired the Peacock Room, painted by James Abbott McNeill Whistler, for his collection in 1904. And at that time, Mary Chase Perry made this peacock vase on the far right of me, in commemoration of that, with peacocks under glaze. There is a gourd-shaped tobacco jar that she made for Mr. Freer. That's featured in some early photographs. And what happened with the iridescent glazes is that Freer brought to the pottery some shards of Babylonian luster, what he called Babylonian luster, and challenged Miss Perry to reproduce the surface condition as though the pot had been buried in the earth for centuries. She did this and developed 6 iridescent glazes, and we show some very early examples, including some sample pieces and what she called her first iridescent, 1906, and by that meaning her first successful iridescent. We will later go and see some of the other pieces as these evolved. One of the very early ones, probably about 1903 or 1904, is this piece here, beginning to show the iridescent, the copper red iridescent inside here. There are also some tiles in this cabinet, reminiscent of the tiles that she made for Mr. Freer's gallery fireplace at his home in Detroit, Michigan. This small section deals with an important part of Pewabic's early production, which was the lamps and leaded glass shades that I mentioned before. It was discontinued by 1910. They were moving on to more exciting things for them, which was the advent of tile works and continuing their arts and crafts mission in creating beautiful things for everyday living. This small lamp here is about 1904. It's the Kokomo opalescent glass in the shade. Here are some other examples of smaller lamps. They were called electrolier. This is a lamp base, 1904, flowing matte glaze, ivory and brown. A typical lamp and leaded shade of this size would have ran between $85 and $150 in 1904. That's 10 years before Mr. Ford announces a $5 day wage. So these were not at all inexpensive items. Very few lamps and shades are known to survive. In the case of this one, the family had this lamp until the mid-50s. It had its leaded shade on, but as the decorating styles changed, that shade was disposed of in favor of a silk cloth shade. We have some examples of the sketches that appear in the Pewabic Pottery's day books, which was a daily record of their sales that occurred, and also some other photographs of the interior of their first studio on Alfred Street in downtown Detroit. And this is the fall of 1904. Curiously enough, the plate that you see up against the wall is a 1904 freeform plate. Again, it's kind of remarkable for the time period. It's a heavy porcelaneous clay body, which Pewabic started out using, again, coming from the idea of porcelain teeth and working at high temperatures. That eventually gave way to some of the later work, particularly the iridescent pieces, which were not so highly fired. In this case, we are showing some of the early Pewabic pieces. Most of these have maple leaf marks, and you will see that within the show. There are examples of the marks from the various pieces that we have exhibited with the piece. So the curators and collectors and people interested, dealers as well, will have some examples to look at. This little inkwell in the form of a conch was Miss Perry's inkwell on her desk. It was also exhibited at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. The matte green, flowing matte green pieces often said that these were sort of copies of William Gruby in Boston. But in 1900, Mary Chase Perry sold William Gruby a kiln, spent some time working with him, and when you put the Pewabic glazes side against the Gruby glazes, they're considerably different. We have also some articles that were published on Miss Perry, this one in 1905 in February, showing her flowing matte glazes. Miss Perry, Mary Chase Perry, the potter, it says, Ceramic Studio. It's important to keep people in the process, and we've used a number of personal photographs throughout the show that demonstrate. Here's one of Calkins and Perry together. There are only 3 photographs of the 2 of them together, and this particular one is Miss Perry's wedding photograph in June of 1918, and the pot that she's decorating or arranging the plants in is this lovely red iridescent pot that's here. As you look at these glazes, you'll see a diversity in them. We've tried to make a selection. In an exhibit this small, it's not really this small at all, but the diversity of Pewabic is quite great. So it's not an encyclopedic exposition, it's rather one that's demonstrated to show the range of the pottery itself. And in that, we move now from these early glazes to the softer, more bright iridescent glazes for which Mary Chase Perry and Pewabic Pottery are perhaps best known. The exhibit has a rather expansive array of iridescent glazes dating from 1906 up until the 1950s. At the time that Mary Chase Perry and Horace Calkins were working in the beginning, all of these glazes had to be made from scratch. Today, studio potters buy frits and add to that their colorants to create their glazes. Very few make their own glazes from scratch. So these are rather unique and individualistic pieces. Their purpose was never to standardize their wear. They never published a catalog of their tiles or their pots, and glazes were frequently named after customers for whom they were made. Blue was Mary Chase Perry's favorite color, and it was often said that she had 2 dresses, both of them were blue. Her garden in her personal home was planted in blue flowers, and so the blues are very, very brilliant. They start usually with this blue matte 201 glaze, which is fired, and an iridescent glaze is then put over top of it to create these examples that you see here. The reds that are in the exhibit usually come from copper, which is where the name Pewabic comes from. As I said, Miss Perry was born in Hancock, Michigan, and there are 3 copper mines there, one of which is called the Pewabic Copper Mine, and green being based from copper, she selected the name Pewabic Pottery as the name of her business in 1903. She talks a little bit about the iridescent glaze in the panel, and she said, "My iridescent has been developed from a fortunate beginning into the present stage, always uncertain but less so at each time. It is an expensive glaze to make. It is an expensive glaze because of the materials and because of the firing that goes into it. She developed, as I said, 6 types of iridescent glaze, going from red to gold, and you will see a wide variety of those in here. Many times in firing the kilns, if the kiln did not come out the way she wanted to, she would simply close the door and refire. Again, she developed their own kilns, and the firing was critical to the finish in the pots themselves. Her iridescent glazes were not made available to the public. She kept those records private. And today, Pewabic Society, Inc. is producing glazes very similar in some parts, but they're not able to use the materials such as she did in lead and other chemicals and minerals that are just not being used by potters today, particularly in any circumstance like that. We have on the wall here a number of individual pieces, and I'm delighted with this show, this venue for the show, because the light is of such a caliber that the Pewabic pots literally sing. And often light is a critical factor, and galleries often do not have the kind of light that this needs. So on these walls, you'll see also there are marks with the individual pots so that you're able to observe the pot bottom. Mary Chase rarely ever signed anything. If it is, it's marked Pewabic Detroit or Maple Leaves Pewabic. But on this particular pot, she has signed the bottom of it, Mary Chase Stratton. It was one of her favorites and one that pleased Mr. Freer a great deal. Charles Freer bought a number of Pewabic pots. He gave 3 to the Detroit Museum of Art, and it's the only Western pottery included in the Freer Gallery of Art's collection today. There are 35 examples. Obviously, Mr. Freer's died in 1919. The examples stop and preclude any of the glaze developments that happened after that. Mary Chase Perry continued to develop glazes up until the 1950s. She lived until 1961 when she died at the age of 94. Her assistant, Ella Peters, came to work for her in 1938, and during my course of education, I had the delightful pleasure of spending 17 years working with Ella Peters, learning about Pewabic and its glazes. And it is really a treat to see all of these examples in this show, and I know that the public is going to like it as well. I've arranged these 2 vessels here to demonstrate some of the unique qualities of Pewabic pottery. I spoke earlier about this piece, the blue matte 201 glaze, and spoke about the iridescent glaze being put over top of it. And from your perspective now, this pot appears gold or bronze, but it's actually a blue iridescent glaze. It's a rather magnificent glaze, and when I turn it to another angle, you can see the blues that are in this pot. And it has the blue 201 matte glaze first, fired, and then glazed a second time with an iridescent glaze to give it this bright gold finish. Now, many times Mrs. Stratton didn't hope for that bright gold. She wanted a more matte gold, and she would treat the glaze accordingly. This is one of the characteristics that makes Pewabic quite unique. Another feature of the show is we focused a little bit on the yellows and orange that Pewabic produced using chrome and uranium. Today we don't think of uranium as a glaze material, but Mary Chase used uranium to achieve some of these effects. We have several examples here. These 2 here are from chrome. These other oranges are from uranium. These were glazed in a bright white glaze, bright meaning shiny, with the uranium glaze put over top of it. This particular one is a yellow glazed bottom, yellow glazed pot, fired a second time with the glaze over top to create that special effect. These are not found too often, and we're very happy to have this grouping as part of the show. One of the things, if you were a friend of the Strattons, you would usually get a Christmas card made out of clay, and on the back side it would say, "Greetings from W.M. and Mary Chase Stratton." During the Second World War, they produced jewelry, buttons, pins, earrings, as part of their effort to survive, and also souvenir tiles for organizations and for individuals. There's an oval one from the Realtors Association, and this wonderful one here, "In Detroit, Life is Worth Living," produced for the Detroit Board of Commerce about 1910, showing the Detroit skyline, a winged wheel for transportation, hammers for construction industry, anchor for the marine trade, and plants for agriculture. Also, and during the time frame, they produced other sorts of things, lighting devices such as this hanging lantern with a reticulated butterfly design, and cigarette boxes or jewelry boxes with lids, very decorated, very highly glazed, during the late 1940s and early 1950s. Even some bowls from the 30s, quatrefoil, with beautiful glazes, sometimes different glaze inside and another glaze out. Again, we have some of the marks on these various pieces for you to see. I mentioned before that Pewabic pottery expanded into tile making, both for public and private spaces and sacred spaces as well. And we highlight just a few of those in this show. We have some pieces from the Scott Fountain on Belle Isle in Detroit, a pair of seahorses, a plaque from the Griswold House Hotel bar of 1910 with two monks toasting themselves, and a tile that was used in Cass Technical High School in Detroit, 1917. And in this particular one, the two monks are back to back as though contemplating their glass of wine. This was an early tile installation from the Michigan Art Building, now demolished, with 1-foot square tiles showing a panoramic scene in the background of the fireplace itself. We'll spend a little bit of time and look at 4 private residence installations. There are many, many tile installations beginning in the year 1907, going up to 1966 when the pottery closed and was given to Michigan State University. An interesting thing about Pewabic, we saw how expensive it was with the lamps and shades, that in all of the years of Pewabic's existence, 1903 to 1966, the total gross sales, pottery, tile, clay, glazes, everything, did not exceed $1,200,000. In comparison, a pottery like Rookwood in Cincinnati in 1929 alone sold nearly $1 million in pots that single year. So Pewabic is a rare commodity. Let's have a look at some of the residential designs. In the exhibit, we selected 4 residential designs, one of which is open to the public. The other 3 are private. On my far right is the entertainment room of the Dodge Gray House in Detroit's historic Indian Village. The house was built by John Dodge for his daughter's wedding present, and the tiles above the fireplace denote various forms of entertainment in the 4x4s and a history of dance in the oblong panels. They are largely unglazed, oxide-tinted tiles with iridescent individual 1x1-inch tiles set in place, which happens when there's a fire. The hearth sparkles from the 1x1 iridescent tiles. Next is the sunroom, garden room at Stan Hewitt Hall in Akron, Ohio, the home of the Seiberling family. And this house is now open to the public, so you can visit and see this sunroom. And it's a legend of the Well of St. Kien, and the young bride is holding a broken roc's egg from which the water pours out into the fountain itself. Another one in Detroit's historic Indian Village is the Roscoe B. Jackson House. He was vice president of Hudson Motor Car Company. The house is tiled throughout with Pewabic tile. The hallways, the sunroom, the fountain and fireplace, and this particular image is the library fireplace. Another that we chose was Cranbrook House, a 1920 fireplace for an addition that George Booth put on. George Booth was the publisher of the Detroit News, first president of the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts, of which Miss Perry and Horace Calkins were founding members. And this is a lovely installation demonstrating the use of iridescent tiles, decorative tiles, and bands of gold 1x1 tiles to create the edge. Again, there were many we could choose from. These are some less likely seen, and we thought they would be appropriate in this exhibition. We'll now have a look at some of the work of some of the ecclesiastical work for sacred spaces that forms a fourth of our exhibit here. Pewabic's first ecclesiastical installation was that of the Cathedral Church of St. Paul in Detroit on Woodward and Hancock, and was designed by Ralph Adams Cram, Boston architect known for his Gothic revival and church building. Cram was also president of the Boston Society of Arts and Crafts. The church is a symphony in tile work from the narthex floor up to the sanctuary floor, and we have in this exhibit a tile sample made for the architect in 1908. It's well worth a visit, open to the public. The reredos were carved especially for the church, and the artwork goes throughout. The tile changes from unglazed oxide-tinted tiles coming in to these ivory browns in the choir floor to an absolute dark, bright blue iridescent tile on the sanctuary floor. And one reporter referred to this tile as starry as the skies of ancient Egypt. How they knew the skies of ancient Egypt were starry, I'm not sure, but the glaze name that stuck with that was Egypt Blue. Another church that was done in Detroit is Church of the Most Holy Redeemer. It's a Catholic parish church, and again, tile being used throughout the church itself. Mary Chase employed some of the same designs in the altar place, but in quite a different interpretation. St. Paul's being 1908 to 1912, Church of the Most Holy Redeemer, 1922 to 26. We feature in the exhibit also two sculptural pieces executed by Gwen Lux, a student of Mary Chase Stratton's at Pottery in 1927. These were for the North Woodward Congregational Church at Woodward and Blaine, now St. John's. Over the doorways is law in this lunette, and then over the baptistry is love. And these are oxide tinted and also slip decorated portions with iridescence used to highlight the sculpture itself. We also feature some tiles from St. Paul's, as well as one of the sketches from the sanctuary itself. From that, we're going to look at the work by Mary Chase Stratton's husband, the architect William Stratton, also a potter in his own right, and another potter that came to Pewabic, Alexis Laptev, a white immigrant, Russian immigrant, who graduated from architecture school at U of M in 1930, found himself in the Depression and no work, and ultimately lived 5 years with the Strattons and worked at the pottery, creating his own designs and installations. William Stratton was also a founding member of the Society of Arts and Crafts, knew Miss Perry from the 1890s. During the course of their friendship, it's interesting that they didn't marry until 1918. He was keenly interested in the application of ceramics to architecture, and also the concept of dynamic symmetry or the proportional relationship to pots themselves. Some people have thought that William Stratton only dabbled in pottery because of the Depression and nothing to do with architecture, but actually he was already a consummate potter by the mid-1920s and exhibited on his own. We have in the showcase some examples of dynamic symmetry, again the marks, also some of his own carved pieces with this Edelweiss. He was a member of Detroit's Scarab Club, and in 1934 made this wonderful box for the Scarab Club in Detroit. The box has a scarab beetle on its surface, and as you can see is highly gold iridescent. Stratton worked usually with architectural designs. His pieces are usually signed, WBS or W.B. Stratton, and we have a highly delightful piece with great color that was signed 1932, W.B. Stratton for John Chalice, a friend of his. So it's quite a variation of the pieces that you're able to see of William Stratton's on exhibit in this show. As I mentioned, Alexis Laptev, we have two sculptural pieces. These are unfired, they were bisque fired, but they were not glazed. And quite probably because in creating this piece, Alexis used a Pewabic tile, test tile, to support the horse until it could dry, and apparently forgot about it and fired the test tile with the piece, and therefore made it less interesting to complete. Alexis did a number of sculptural things, garden sculpture, also a storybook fireplace for Cadillac School in 1933. I had the pleasure of knowing Alexis Laptev and learning from him and his time with the Strattons as well. We have another wonderful piece. You saw the early freeform bowl that was 1904. Well, here was a much later freeform bowl with a K4 glaze, blue glaze inside, and gold iridescence on the outside, dating from the 1940s. Again, Mary Chase Stratton believed that simple shapes live throughout the ages. She was also determined that people should be their own potters, develop their own formulas. And in 1945, she published a book called Ceramic Processes for learners to teach themselves ceramics. She developed the ceramics program at the University of Michigan and also at Wayne State University and taught at both of those schools, as well as teaching classes at the pottery itself. We have in the installation panel at the beginning of the show a photograph of her with a monumental pot dated 1913 that she sculpted the design of the band when her first home was completed, designed by William Stratton. There's a black and white photo, and there's also a color photo of her at age 90 at Pewabic Pottery in 1957, celebrating the 50th anniversary in the building. As I said, Mary Chase lived until 1961, and when she passed on, Ella Peters ran the pottery until 1966, when the son of Horace James Calkins gave the pottery and its contents to the Michigan State University to operate as a ceramics center. By 1979, Michigan State had major cuts to make and sought to find a home for the pottery. And a group of ad hoc individuals formed the Pewabic Society, Inc. And in 1982, we're a nonprofit corporation, and Michigan State University deeded the pottery and its contents to the Pewabic Society, who now operates the building, making tiles, teaching classes, and running a museum. I mentioned the Pewabic Society, and I'm a past president of that organization as well as one of the founding members. I hope you will come and visit this show. We have borrowed from private collectors and also from the Pewabic Society. I certainly would like to thank David and Tara Ciccatelli, Alvaro Jurado, David Spear, and some of the pieces that come from my collection as well. It's an opportunity to see pieces that have not been exhibited in some cases before publicly, and pieces that you'll rarely see again as they go back into private hands. So if you're interested in Pewabic, if this video piques your interest at all, the exhibit opens June 1 and runs through September 29th of this year. And I hope you'll pay a visit to this museum and see the wonderful work by Marshall Fredericks as well as the complimentary work by Pewabic Pottery. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed your tour with Dr. Thomas Brunk of Pewabic Pottery, Patronage, Private Residences, Public Buildings, Sacred Spaces exhibition here at the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum at Saginaw Valley State University. The thing I think you will enjoy even more than what you just watched is to come and see for yourself this beautiful exhibition of historic Pewabic pottery at the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum. One of the reasons we decided to bring this exhibition here is because these are two of Michigan's most cherished artists, Mary Chase Perry Stratton from Pewabic Pottery and Marshall M. Fredericks. They share quite a lot in common, actually. They both lived to be in their 90s. They both worked for many, many years in Metro Detroit and worked together, or I shouldn't say together, but at the same time for 30 consecutive years. And they both are what I would call architects artists. Mary Chase Perry Stratton designed many, many tiles and tile installations for public buildings and sacred spaces. Marshall Fredericks was often asked by architects to collaborate with them in the creation of public sculpture in public buildings. A very good example of that is the Spirit of Detroit in the City-County building of the Wayne and Detroit City and County. And so I invite you to come to the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum any day between now and September 29 to view this extraordinary Pewabic Pottery exhibition, as well as the Marshall and Frederick Sculpture Museum. Thank you.